Hello.
Welcome to Tranquillitas Healing Hub, and today we have a lucky special friend with us. His name is Darryl.
Thank you for inviting me along to share my story, ladies. You know?
Yeah, that's
Very welcome. It's so good.
Yeah.
It is, and it's wonderful to be in such a positive, sort of nurturing space to be able to communicate things that make a difference for all of us. I think, you know, if anybody out there sort of gets something from any of these videos or the series, it's such a blessing. It makes a huge difference. You know?
It's the reason why I do it, because this forms a bit of my own therapy. It's getting out of my box and listening to others' stories and how they've gotten through. So I just wanted to say, we met Darryl when we did our first recording, and it was lovely. Like, we just finished our recording and we pressed stop, and I was just packing up the tripod, and Darryl walks past and goes, "Oh, hello ladies, how are you?" I'm like, "Good." He said, "Are you doing a photo shoot?" And I went, "Oh, not quite, we're doing videos." And I was like, it's so nice, like, just this lovely man, just so full of life, walking into our sphere. And so we had a little chat about what we were doing, and the rest is history, and here we are. So
Absolutely.
I just wanted to put out there that Darryl is the first one that wants to share his story, and I feel so privileged.
And blessed.
And blessed to be able to do this
very
for
kind.
Darryl. So
Thank you.
I'll
Thank
let you let us know what your story is about.
Sure. Well,
today.
I think it works because it's in keeping with the theme of what Peter's going to present today. And I just wanted to share with you in that I was doing really well in the job. I was in a sales position. And I enjoyed my work very much. My colleagues were lovely people and things like that. I would also like to suggest that it's interesting that the company that I was working for had a very strong HR.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
They did have a set of values that they were, we were encouraged to take on in our work, which I thought was really good, you know, and it was very positive and things like that. So I thought that I can align myself with that. However, out of the blue, within 1 week, with a performance review that was outstanding, really, and I did well, you know. It's because I'm enjoying my job, you know, like my people. It's inevitable that you end up enjoying your work. But it was very interesting that in a space of 1 week, I found myself unemployed, right, with a black mark against my name to make sure I will never be able to get another job again.
Oh.
For real. I know. It was incredible. You know, the pain that came out of this was phenomenal. You know, the self-doubt, the depression, the anger at how can this be happening to me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. You know, like, I could go into great depth and detail about how appallingly this entire episode was handled. It was incredible. You know, like, people just said things that they needed to say. They just, you know, people that I trusted turned around 180 degrees with such a sense of, don't care. You know, it's time for you to go. Go, don't come back, and we don't care whether we stomp on your face and you never get a job again. It was tightly sewn up, you know, and I was just completely bewildered, you know. So my point being is that it's a kind of like also a major trauma that happens. It's not unlike, you know, like a partner passing away, or you find you've got yourself a disease, or any number of really, really traumatic things that happen to people in life that you can't really avoid, but this was one of them,
Yeah.
And so what I'd like to talk about is some of the things that I took on board to cope with this situation, right?
Yep. Yes.
Mainly because I was also aware that this is enough to break a person, and it has happened before where people have just said, I can't handle this anymore, and have just committed suicide, or, like have split from their families, have gone into major depressions, all of these sort of things, that do happen as a result of this sort of event. And I felt so terrible at the time, but the difference was I found myself in a place where I could choose. I could choose to let this be the dominant factor and live in resentment and pain and anger for the rest of my life, or I could try something different. So what I thought was, what I can do about this is I'm going to approach this from a perspective of clarity, almost like a prayer. I want clarity out of this to come about, mainly because that, as horrible as it was, at that point in time, you can't back out. You're in too deep. In that you can't just say, oh no, everything's going to be fine, because you're in the middle of it, it's happening to you, and it's not going to let you go by the throat, and you can feel the kind of
Pressure.
the pressure and the negative emotion that's present in a place like that. So as I say, I was thinking, okay, one possibility perhaps is clarity, because clarity feels a lot better than pain, and even though, and so it was a case of being able to, it brought about a sense of acceptance of the situation, and I'd just like to share a couple of points that I found has been really helpful in this situation. Is that first of all, and also hindsight doesn't work very well, because these because when it first happened as well, I didn't see it coming. That's an important point, you see, and then at the end of this, they were, like my lawyer and my family that are all involved in this sort of situation happening, going, you shouldn't have signed that document, Baz. If you didn't sign that document, then you wouldn't be in this situation. But that's a case of hindsight, isn't it? And it's like, well, you can't take that back, and it doesn't really help at all, So the first step was, again, it was coming out of this possibility of clarity, is that I started writing everything down.
Okay.
Absolutely everything, like what I was feeling, as well as point form of what actually occurred in that environment. This happened at this time, this happened at this time. And that was useful for two reasons, I think. One is that it takes all of that morass that's in the mind, puts it on paper, and you get this kind of stand back approach to it, and that lightened my load somewhat. The other was that, about writing it down, is that it's good to find out exactly where you stand.
Yes.
Right, because it's very confusing. So what I did was I made inquiries, like I got in touch with legal aid, I got in touch with a lawyer, I was in touch with my family that have experienced in this sort of situation in business and things like that. I got their advice.
You got your support.
I got my support, and also because I wrote those things down, when professional people were asking me what happened, I said, oh, look, I've got this right here. This is what happened. This is what happened. This is what happened.
Yeah,
You know.
didn't have to relive the emotions of it.
Well, exactly right. I didn't have to live the emotions, and then, you know, like from that professional point of view, they were very quick to point out, well, these are your options.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah. You got your clarity.
You got your clarity.
Yeah.
You know. At the same time, I did also realise that, you know what, and this is the case for many people, your options aren't that great.
Nah.
You know, because these sort of things are sewn up on such a high level
Yes.
that pretty much, you know, if you get out by the skin of your teeth, you're going to be lucky.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
which is also that case of acceptance.
Yes.
But at least, and there was also that step there that's going, okay, well, I've done the best that I could do,
Yeah.
even though I felt really, really terrible
Yeah.
at the time. But it did, again, offer this sense of clarity, you know. And so I got to realise where I stood in relation to what action I could take. And that was, again, a lightening of my load.
Yeah.
The other thing that, in my experience, was very, very helpful is that by the grace of God, I've got a very supportive family and friends.
Yeah.
Right. So I was able to communicate to them, even in a very emotional kind of place,
Yeah.
you know, because that's another point that I want to make, is that going through, especially in the early days, I was out of my freaking head.
Mm.
I was just so distraught. I could actually see myself acting in ways and making choices in my life that really weren't in alignment with how I would normally operate.
Yeah.
You know, and so people like my mother, people like my brother and his family, people like my cousins, my friends, you know, I said, look, I need some space to be able to reach some sort of clarity, again, out of where I'm at, you know. So, especially my mum, she was, I beg your pardon, she was so simple, she just let me be. She didn't say, you should be doing this, you
Yeah,
should be
no
doing
pressure.
that, and no pressure at all. And I did have a mental breakdown, you know. This is the sort of thing, or the reason that I'm sharing it, is that unless it's addressed, this kind of depression can last the rest of your life. If you really, really don't address it, you live within that pain,
Yeah.
and it's a horrible life to be living, you know.
Absolutely.
So I mean, I'm saying I didn't dodge a bullet. I mean, I still had to go through those emotions and things like that. But I just went, if I'm feeling like this, then I've got the space to feel like this. And do you know what? I didn't get out of bed for a week and just like sobbed and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. Just watched Netflix, you know, just stayed in my pajamas. I ate pizza. I just did whatever it I could do to just give myself the space to just chill out, you know, because it wasn't, that emotional state wasn't going to go away. Consequently, as a result of that, I did feel better. I did start to feel a lot better. The other thing I wanted to share with you is that another thing that I took on board, which a lot of people are very hesitant about, is to seek counselling. Get some, you know, because my therapist, an amazing man, I see him as, his job is to be a listening for well-being for their patient.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the intention
Yeah,
that
they're
he
hearing
was.
whatever's coming out of your
Whatever's
mouth.
coming out of my mouth, that intention was there, like a possibility, you know, and that freed me up no end, you know, because it was really interesting how a lot of thoughts and emotions that were in my past that I thought were locked away were actually a very subtle contributor to the situation I found myself in.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
and I was in therapy for quite a few months, and it's like, I know you're not gonna know what's gonna happen in the therapy. I understand how it's expensive, or relatively expensive, and everything like that. But by God, what it was worth every cent, and again, that theme, clarity, was coming through.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
that's what you need.
and that's what you
know
need,
that,
you know,
yeah.
and that, like, that person was there, outside of my head,
Yeah.
and I had the complete freedom
Yeah.
to say whatever I wanted to say, whatever I needed to say, whatever I was afraid to say, you know, and slowly, bit by bit, my attachment to the event started to lift.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and I found myself slowly coming back into that sense of equanimity. You know, like, okay, I'm feeling well. Like 3 months later, you know, I'm feeling, oh wow, I'm a little bit more myself, a little bit more like myself, and as a result of that, there's a piece and a way of looking at the world that was a more empowered version than before the event took place.
Yeah.
You know, so I feel, you know, it may have been a terrible situation to be in, but hey, I've moved. You know, and it's like the contrary has actually occurred. Rather than being damaged by the event, I feel more empowered as a human being as a result of the event.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and perhaps it is an attitudinal thing, and when you're in the midst of that sort of pain, you don't see it. It's only, again, in hindsight that you kind of go, wow, well, those simple steps were actually worth it.
And yet, I just have to add, and when you look in hindsight at the event that you just went through and you handled it better than you did, that's when hindsight works.
Yes.
Because that's when you can go, oh, pat myself on the back because I handled that event so much better than I would have before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and it's true. Thank you for that, because it's absolutely true. You know, and I suppose underlying all of this is that, you know, like, to see our brothers and sisters empowered to be in that good place, because there's bad stuff happening to all of us.
Yes.
You know, and
Absolutely.
that's why I just feel so blessed to be part of this. In that, you know, it's like, well, if you get something from it,
Yeah.
you know, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and I think, you know, your story goes on just every day of the week
Absolutely.
in
Oh, it's
all
incredible.
fields of the workplace and in all parts of Australia.
Yes.
And you know, it's just such a pandemic problem
It is.
affecting people in really good positions, and you know,
Yeah.
I see it right down to the cleaner, you know, or to somebody who's and cleaners are really important, and right down to that very, very whatever skill you're in, whatever workplace you're in, if somebody has got a knife
Yes.
That's it.
for you,
Yeah. That's so true, Peter.
Yeah,
You know.
it's happened to me more times than I can count.
It's
Yeah.
amazing, isn't
Jealousy
it?
in the workplace is prevalent as well.
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah, for sure.
we have some extra additional material that we would like to add on to your.
Absolutely, by all means, of
But
course.
I just want to say, you know, thank you.
Yes, Darryl, it's wonderful.
My pleasure.
Because it's really important
Aw,
for you to
you guys are so
understand
sweet. Thank
that
you.
it is in
Yes.
it's
And
hard
you know what
to
I
speak.
love is
Yeah.
this is we're coming from a male perspective, and now we're actually going to hear something from a female perspective.
Fantastic.
So it's
And-
so balanced, isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely, and so it doesn't matter. We are all human beings, and we all have this, you know, have this dark side within us. You know, dark side that
Yes.
when it attacks us out of the blue, we crumble.
Yeah,
We all have
absolutely.
You know, my story starts.
Yeah.
This is a submission I wrote to the Victorian government's Senate inquiry into bullying in the health industry. And I was asked to write it by a lady who who was the West Australian of the Year in 2016, and her campaign was about bullying in the in the health industry, and her campaign was called The Courage to Be Kind. When I read her article in the West Australia in the Sunday Times, I actually rang the Sunday Times and said I would like to connect with her. I fortunately had, resolved virtually everything that happened to me through my career, and I offered our house as a safe haven for others who wanted to be supported with this person. And she asked me to write a submission to the Victorian Senate inquiry. So again, my love of writing.
Yes.
I chose, it had to be totally anonymous. It wasn't to indicate anywhere that I worked, and my name, everything had to be totally unidentifiable.
Of course.
So the heading was The History of Bullying of a Nurse During Her Extended and Extensive Nursing Career, and how the continuation of bullying and harassment had a profound effect mentally, emotionally, physically and spiritually, causing a total breakdown in her wholeness. So this is absolutely mirroring what
absolutely.
you went through,
Isn't it?
Darryl.
Sure,
Yeah.
there you are. Yeah.
Now, this was written a couple of years ago, 2017. The nurse is now a 69-year-old woman who describes retirement to be the happiest, most contented, peaceful place to be in. For the sake of the confidentiality of this woman and other stakeholders in her story, she called herself Dinosaurus.
Excellent.
Dinosaurus was brought up in remote Australia, a very free spirit who loved nothing else but running free. She was trusting and loved people and life. She was sent to boarding school at 12 and first experienced not all persons were like her, and had a very difficult time settling into an upmarket all-girls school environment. Things were very strict, and the free spirit realised that this was too hard for her, so she ran away, only to have to ring the front door of the convent at 11 p.m. After several hours on the outside. She escaped over a very big brick wall on the night. As she had nowhere to go and she had no money in a big city, the trouble Dinosaurus got into was very harsh. Her parents kept her there despite pleading to come back to her country. They were adamant of getting her a good education. Dinosaurus realised that she had to conform to rules and regulations and started to learn and practice tennis and became a very good tennis player. It strengthened her body and mind, and she could take out her emotional pain on the tennis ball, and it gave her a good physical workout. Having survived 5 years at boarding school, Dinosaurus decided to go to nursing school, something she had dreamed of since a young girl. She was offered a place in a very famous hospital, and even though it was a tough life, she loved it with her compassion for caring through nursing. She had great tutors, mentors, and most of all colleagues, all young, most straight from school, all living together in nurses' quarters, and always having someone to talk to if needed about a bad day. Dinosaurus states that her training days were some of the happiest days of her life. Dinosaurus, on completion of training, went straight back to the bush and spent many years working in rural and remote areas. When Dinosaurus's children were of an age to have the opportunity of a good education, Dinosaurus and her husband decided to leave and return to mainstream living in a city, an alien place for them. However, their children came first. For the first time, Dinosaurus had to go to work in a city secondary hospital, and in 1989, as a senior clinical nurse, blew a whistle on a trial that was being run in the theatre of this hospital. The ramifications of her doing this started an avalanche of harassment, bullying and victimisations by parties involved, with the practitioner involved. This came as a shock to Dinosaurus, and fortunately management were supportive due to the absolute predicament that they realised after the whistle blew what could have been the outcome. Dinosaurus suffered very badly from this and left the workplace to follow a dream of becoming a country matron. Once the children were at university, Dinosaurus was very much an old school nurse who practiced the art of caring. Did become a country matron, a don. However, her main goal was to ensure that the patients were administered the highest standard of care by all involved in their care. She also cared very deeply for her nurses, and she led from the front, being there on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. During this time as a don, she had to address major issues of rogue practitioners and unsafe practices, and made changes in policies and procedures to bring healthcare units into the 1990s in units that were being run on the 1970s model. This created a small cohort of clinicians who set about destroying her career. There were many incidents of malicious, untrue statements being spoken and written about her, and leaked out to the communities in which she worked over a period of 4 years. These ended up in council minutes, medical advisory meeting minutes, and when a local politician brought these into the political arena, discussing it in Parliament, this was the final straw that broke her back. The health department knew all about what was going on, however, covered it all up and ignored the issues, despite calls and cries for help from Dinosaurus and others for a proper investigation into the bullying, harassment and victimisation issues that would not stop. Dinosaurus finally broke into a physical, mental, emotional and spiritual wreck. Dinosaurus was heavily sedated and on very strong antidepressants. She would not go outside the front door of her home for 6 months and would have severe nightmares of the main perpetrator knocking on the door and throwing acid in her face. Her light nearly went out. And if it was not for the love of her devoted husband, family and friends, for the care of a caring GP and a very caring visiting psychiatrist, she may not be here today. Dinosaurus was sent to a private hospital in a major city and referred to a very highly respected psychiatrist. It was this psychiatrist who saved her life. When the psychiatrist listened to her story, the psychiatrist said to her, "It is not you. I know this man." It was then the light of her heart started to become a little stronger and the healing process began. It took 9 months for Dinosaurus to recover and heal from this breakdown. It was not helped by her position being advertised by the general manager of the health service during her rehabilitation period. This was done 2 months before the plan return to work day. And by this time, Dinosaurus was so much stronger mentally, emotionally and spiritually, she immediately contacted the health service and sought clarification of the advertisement and that she was not resigning and would be returning to her gazetted position. Dinosaurus was told it was a misunderstanding and a mistake. To this day, Dinosaurus does not believe that.
Neither do I.
Oh, whoops. Oh, we just spent all that money making that advert for no.
It's
This was fully accepted as a workers' compensation claim. Restructures followed on Dinosaurus's return to work, and although things had settled for her in some ways, other good senior nursing staff were receiving the same abuse she had been subject to. Again, the health department did not support the staff until it was too late, and eventually 6 years after the abuse first manifested, the health department set up a consultant to help the staff deal with the continuum of this perpetrator's behaviour, and the head of the health department came up to deal with the main perpetrator personally.
6 years.
Yeah.
Dinosaurus knew her days were numbered, and she became a target for senior bureaucrats. Dinosaurus always stuck to her ethical and holistic management practices and would not bend to suit the wants of administration services. A redundancy was arranged, and Dinosaurus left her community and the role she was so devoted to. Dinosaurus finished her last years still being bullied, harassed by administration in other roles she'd undertaken in a tertiary institution where she worked. Her role as a peer support officer brought back bad memories for her, and the lies and malicious gossip that was spread about her in this setting amongst persons whom she challenged before clinical governance were reminiscent of the 1990s. This period lasted for 3 years, and Dinosaurus began to feel the way she did in 1987. And fortunately for 1997, this period lasted for 3 years. She had a very kind and supportive and compassionate GP who knew she was suffering, and she left the workforce and left the profession which she devoted her life's work to. While she had very hard times, she also had wonderful memories of her journey in nursing and has had amazing experiences and blessed with wonderful friendships. She freely admits her husband, a partner of 45 years, has been her rock and brought her where she is today. Dinosaurus is proud to write up this synopsis, and I hope it will help others to see light at the end of the tunnel. Her biggest message today is to care for and love yourself, and that it is okay to put up your hand and say, I am broken, as it is then the healing begins and you begin the journey in returning to wholeness. It takes time, journey through a passion, music, art, or whatever makes you happy. Work on all parts of your spiritual, mental, emotional and physical bodies. You can do it. And we've just seen that with Darryl's story. Before I complete this, I share a little poem with you.
Okay. Please.
Please untie my knots that are in my heart, my life. Remove the cannots, have-nots and do-nots that I have in my mind. Erase the will knots, may nots, might nots that might find home in my heart. Release me from the could nots and would nots and should nots that obstruct my life. But most of all, dear God, that you remove from my mind, my heart and my life all of the am-nots that I have allowed to hold me back, especially the thought, I am not good enough.
Boom.
Yeah.
In the stage of my life, I now believe at 70 years old, and I'll say now 72, I have changed from the life being a journey to now a life to a sacred journey to everlasting life. May God bless you all, and please remember we are all on the journey and we are all here to support each other on the journey. Thank you.
Hallelujah. Thank you, Vina. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Actually, there was a very interesting thing that happened to me when I wrote that and handed it over. And I was feeling unwell after I had written it.
Yeah.
It was a release, but I was just feeling really, really unbalanced. So I went and saw a nurse healer friend of mine, and she gave me a healing. Well, I ended up with a healing crisis, a real healing crisis for 4 days.
Wow.
On the Saturday night, my abdomen just blew up, like a balloon.
Okay.
And I was really uncomfortable. I couldn't eat, I couldn't do anything. I went to bed and I felt so nauseated. And what was so interesting was at 1 o'clock in the morning, I got up and I vomited 2 buckets of black bile. Black
Wow.
bile.
Wow.
Exorcism
What-
much?
What was so
You know, these things happen. It's
what
for real.
was so interesting, I had
Yeah.
written a paper the year before on the history of the ancient healing arts,
Okay.
and I came to Hippocrates' era,
Yeah.
and in doing my research for this presentation, I found out that Hippocrates had 4 humours that based his practice and theories on. Now, Hippocrates is known as the first doctor
Indeed.
and started the first
Sure.
hospital. These humours were mucus,
Yep.
blood, yellow bile, black bile.
Bile.
Mm.
Now, I had never heard of black bile in my life.
Yeah, and you're like in the hospital all the time. You would have seen it.
Really?
Are you sure you would have seen black bile?
Oh,
If you're in the
yeah.
hospital and you're a nurse, you should know.
Yellow bile was
Yeah,
the thing
yeah.
from the liver.
Black bile.
Anyway, I
Sad.
did a lot of digging to find out about this black bile.
Mhm.
And it turned out there's a little tiny little red corpuscle that is produced in the spleen.
Okay.
And it is, the role of that little cell is, red blood cell, is to go to the bones for bone health.
Okay.
Now, if there is a blockage within your systems,
Yeah.
that blood does not, that cell does not go to the bones. It actually goes to the brain and causes depression.
Huh.
And when you think of the word, that's where the word black dog comes from.
It's black bile.
Black bile.
And then starts to build up in your stomach.
That's really interesting, isn't it?
Wow.
I was blown away by this.
Oh.
Pre-cancer stuff.
Absolutely
Ah.
Sorry.
blown away
That's
by
amazing.
it.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow.
And, you know, I woke up next morning and I was a different person.
Really?
Yep,
Mhm.
yep.
Yep.
And then I could come out
Mhm.
and write this when I was asked to.
Yeah.
Shivers.
Really?
Yep.
Yep. Yep.
So this was after that event
After
Yes,
that
you
you were
did
able to
it.
just,
You got it out of your stomach and
and
out
then
of
it just all flowed.
And it all just flowed and I was just like, it was a release.
Yeah.
And but 2 buckets, so
Yeah.
it had been buried, things had been buried down
Good
right from
Lord.
the time I was a little girl.
Yeah.
Physical
And this
removal.
Took me on another journey in relation to holding memories that
Yeah.
are been traumatic memories down at very deep cellular and DNA level.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it was just the most amazing part of my journey over the last, since I left the workplace.
Wow.
Wow. I mean,
Thank you for sharing.
That's
that.
amazing.
That is incredible, isn't
Oh
it?
wow.
Huh?
I'm going to be researching like the black bile now, working it out. But your stress manifests. So I'm going to move a bit closer.
Yes, do.
Stress manifests on everybody differently, doesn't
Absolutely,
it?
Absolutely.
it does.
Yeah.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
all these events, they're just going to cause a different stress in our body. And when you've held your stress in so many years because you've had to have your head on because you're the Don, you're in charge. You're not allowed to process that. So
Well-
you put it away, put it away, put it away.
Absolutely. And what was so interesting, when the 1989 event happened, there was no occupational health and safety. We had no legislation here in Western Australia. Oh, sorry. No legislation here.
That's all right.
The Act wasn't actually come into vogue until the 1990s, early 90s.
Yeah.
But the other thing that was so interesting is that bullying in nursing has been there forever. And just as I mentioned before, we started the video today that I remember back in nursing school when I worked in theatre, there was a surgeon who would throw instruments, an orthopaedic surgeon who would throw instruments at nurses.
Sharp ones.
No, hammers, you name it. And nobody was ever held accountable. 1989 was not held accountable.
Wow.
And in 1997, no accountability.
Yeah.
And from what I hear from so many nurses, it's still really rife in the industry today. And I'm also hearing it from doctors. And, you know, just people are just telling me stories because I'm so now open and free to share my story.
Because you can.
Because I can.
Yeah.
And, you know, if we want a better future for our children, we have to bring back values and we have to bring back virtues of kindness and, you know,
tolerance.
Yeah.
It's a big one. We learnt about tolerance at detox and the window of tolerance. I had no idea what tolerance meant until I went to detox. And they were saying everybody has a window of tolerance, and some people's window of tolerance is like that. And if you imagine you're hyper, and then you're sad, you're up, you're sad, and some people, they can stay within their window of tolerance. When you have substance or you have an event or something, your window of tolerance shuts down to about that big.
Sure.
And so it doesn't really take very much for someone to go outside their window of tolerance and snap and go outside of their comfort zone. My window of tolerance when I'm depressed goes peephole size. I can't help it.
Sure.
Because I try very hard to have everything flow and be perfect and all that, and when I have something bucked up against that, it throws me. So that's what I'm learning to do, is expand out my window of tolerance so that not as much gets to me.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's something is when you say about the better future for our children, and with the doctors and XYZ people still doing those things, things will change in time, the balance will change, the language will change, because we're teaching our children now all of these values. And I know that as sad as it is that we didn't have the legislation in place all those years ago, and we didn't have the safety for everybody in place, we sort of do now, because they've worked out these are the areas that our humans need help with. They need help with their internal processing.
Yes, absolutely.
And once they're firm, whole, balanced souls, they'll be able to work to the best of their ability. But if you break someone's back all the time, you're going to get a 50%, 20% work capacity out of that person.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it particularly in all areas, it affects your work. It affects if you're working in the, in the humanities, and if you're working in retail, for example, you know, it affects. You know, even though you're holding it in, it still makes you kind of on guard.
That's it.
I think is the right
Yep,
word.
Absolutely.
on guard. Yep.
On guard.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you know, I think
Tenderhooks.
tenterhooks, and I also think that you know, if we, as you were talking about that whole balance, and then as you get that balance, then you don't react.
Exactly. Yeah.
You don't
Yeah,
react.
because you're firm and you're confident, you're calm within yourself.
Yep.
And it's like I remind myself of Buddha and Jesus, and you know that might, you know, I think of myself maybe in a bit of a war, like, and I just imagine them. They are in a peace and in a calm, because within them they know that they are.
Because they're so present.
They're
I
present.
think, wasn't it really the underlying theme of any of these great
Yeah, it's like, look
masters,
at this flower.
you know?
What is this flower's existence? And it's all about that tiny little thing, not things happening out there. What's that
Absolutely,
right there?
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the central message for us as well, isn't it? You know, like the more present we are, we let go of the issues, whether they're there or not, and you know, like and just
absolutely.
that presence is all that makes a huge difference.
You know, that we live in present time, which is just like us living here.
But I have to also say that, like, I want to just put on with the awakenings and that we have. So we go through an event and we wake up, and now we have to process all this information, and now we have to find balance again.
Yep.
Because we're awake. Up until that point, and I'm going to pull on this word called the matrix, we are conditioned, and we work a certain way, and we live a certain way. Everything is a certain way, and then we unplug from the matrix because of an event. All of a sudden, we don't know the rules. We don't know how to react. We don't even know where we are most of the time.
Or who we are.
Or who we
or
are.
what we're supposed to be doing.
That's the biggest question that happens, is it, who am I? Oh, I've lost my job.
Yes.
That was my associate. Oh, I'm Darryl's salesman.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not Darryl's. Oh, who am I?
Not anymore.
And so you have to automatically go into this inward,
Yes,
and it's
yes.
scary. So
Yes.
we reach outwards for support. Your job used to help me, used to keep me from not stressing out. So I'm going to go back to that job because it doesn't stress me out. And you went back, and it did, because you'd been woken up. You're aware of everything and all the injustices that were happening in the past, and now you're seeing it happen again. Nothing's changed. The depression comes back.
Yep.
Right? And it's not until you've been able to find wholeness within yourself again and realise that in time things will change, and you've let go to the attachment of it happening now, you've been able to find that wholeness again.
Oh yeah, look, to return to wholeness has been the I can't describe what it's like.
I can't wait to get there. I'll be honest, I'm looking forward to it.
It's taken a very long time, but I think that healing is just the most important thing, and yet nobody talks about healing. They don't talk about it.
Which is, mind you, that we're talking about it.
Yeah.
That's
But
what happens out of the
but you're
intention.
right. But you're saying it's nobody wants to talk about it because it means that all of a sudden they've got to share their story.
Yes.
And they're opening themselves up to judgment.
Yeah.
And when we've been brought up and living in a fear-based, reactive way,
Indeed.
we're always going to be having that boundary up there, right?
Yeah.
And it's not until you've been on a hurling journey that you recognise other people around you that are suffering, and you go, I see, you look like I used to when I was depressed. You're looking depressed right now. Let me pull you out.
Yes, pull you up. Make you feel, and 2 points about that, Alicia. One is that it's also important to be able to appreciate where you are on your journey.
Absolutely.
Because that takes away the having to fix something. This is a journey, and to enjoy the journey.
Yeah, enjoy it for what it is.
Yeah, and I'll say that the only person that can heal you is yourself. No one else can do it.
That is so true.
You're the only one who can do it. And
which is quite daunting as well, because it makes you feel very isolated, very alone, especially when you're in that place going, I don't have my identity like I used to. What the hell am I going to do? Who am I?
Yeah, what did I used to like as a kid?
It's very well, tapping into that is one of the most powerful things in the universe.
And that's why, I'm so blessed to have those 4 grandchildren who've taught me to live like a little child and see things through the eyes of a child, and just have love and light and peace and joy.
It's innocent, isn't it?
Innocence, to go back to that, to the true self within. And when you live like that and live from the inside out, then you live in a place.
Peter, from what you're saying, and it's like when people are, when they are in a bad place, it can be very daunting, very isolating, but as you say, there are all of these blessings of ways of being, like from grandchildren that are just so open and fully self-expressed, but just from being out on the lake, those cute doggies.
Mm.
You know, the animals are one of our greatest teachers in how we're being, because they're so spontaneous and they're just so
And the
themselves.
birds.
And the ducks, God bless them, and the little herons. And
I had to laugh
They're
this
so
morning
pretty,
when
you know.
I was out doing my, when I was sitting on the log this morning doing my prayer and meditation time and contemplation. Yesterday I watched two little spiders, very busy weaving a web.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And this morning when I walked around to get onto my log, I walked through the web.
And they're probably thinking, damn it, Peter, sit back
And
again.
then, when the sun came out, back came one of the spiders,
Yeah.
and I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I walked through your web." And so he starts weaving
It
again.
gives them something to do,
It
really,
was
doesn't
so
it? You know, it's
lovely,
cute.
like it was really cute. Here am I sitting on the log having a conversation with a spider.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's
I
love.
talk to the ducks all the time.
It's much nicer than talking to the walls.
And also, these creatures are incredible because, you know, like they've got these macro cameras now that can zoom up on these tiny little insects and animals on such a huge level. You should see how cute spiders' eyes are. They're like cartoons. You know, they are just
And
adorable.
it's just like David Attenborough the other night did one on
I love it.
did one on ants.
Yeah. Oh,
David-
gorgeous.
I
Yeah,
just think he's an
lovely.
amazing man.
Yeah.
Look, I think
Yes. I'd like to read a couple
Oh
of
yes,
things.
do.
Look, you know, I'm going to put these up on our webpage, but it's I'm going to read a couple of things from this little book, and it's from it was made by the Centrecare in Geraldton, which is just up north of us in the year 2000. It's called Living with Love, and it's a project that was produced by Centrecare Geraldton and the Geraldton Sexual Assault Resource Centre, with assistance from Partnerships Against Domestic Violence. All right. So within that book, there's these little handouts. These are sorts of things that this would be good to be handing out in groups if it comes up in the conversation. But like, so for example, you know, like this one here, it says you are not alone. Right? It's a nice picture of the hand.
Yeah.
And this is like a mindfulness exercise that gets you to, it says here, list of 5 people who you feel that you could talk to about relationship issues, in this case.
Yeah.
which includes violence in the workplace.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Definitely, because it's a relationship with your co-workers, so same. So you just do your little writings on there, and then you put that up on your wall with a bit of blue tape or sticky tape if
Yeah.
you don't care for your paint.
Yeah.
And when you're in that dark place, because you know it's actually more damaging sometimes when you're in that dark place to try and talk to your partner, for example.
Sure.
And you might not feel like bringing Beyond Blue. Things like this very helpful,
They are.
because I have motivational stuff in every single room in my house. There's motivational stuff there, so that wherever I
too.
am, yeah, and it means things to me. So I when you do affirmations and mantras,
Yeah.
make them from your own words,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
otherwise the vibration's not as strong. You could read out someone else's mantra and you would
Yeah. Yeah.
probably feel quite relaxed, but if you read out your own words with your own energy, it's so much better.
Yeah, I mean,
Good
you're
point.
so right, because, like, I often sing on my way to the lake, and I created a song called Freedom.
Yep.
And it's just so beautiful, and it's turned out to be a mantra for me about
Yeah.
freedom.
Mm.
Yes.
And that's what, you set yourself free.
That's right.
You set yourself free from that
Yeah.
that ego, from that
Yep, yep.
external false
Yep.
self,
Getting out of
to
your...
be in that absolute place of total harmony
I
with
call-
the divinity,
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Yeah.
in the divine,
Yeah.
and live the divine
Yeah.
in the truth.
It's a stillness.
Yeah.
It's a state of stillness and nothingness where you're perfectly balanced emotionally
Mm.
And mentally,
and mentally
and spiritually,
and body's
and
perfect,
physically. Yeah.
Meditation helps.
Oh yeah, I love it. Another one.
Good.
What have we got? Well, you know what? I'm just going to say first off, I'll give you some examples of abuse. Because some people don't understand that these things actually do count as abusive, because it's going to hurt your heart, isn't it? Anything like that's abusive. So emotional abuse is when your partner puts you down, wants you to stop spending time with your friends, questions you on every detail of what you've done without them, uses jealousy or anger to intimidate you or control your behaviour, humiliates you in front of others, threatens to hurt themselves or other people if you break up with them. Okay, so that's emotional abuse.
Yeah.
Physical abuse involves physical acts such as hitting, pulling your hair, threatening to harm you in any way, pushing, kicking, choking, slapping and punching. So anything that touches you as well as threatening to touch you is physical. Sexual abuse involves pressuring you or forcing you to do sexual things that you don't want to do, manipulating you or coercing you into having sex when you don't want to, by saying things like, oh, you'd do it if you'd love me. Yeah. So that's the sort of abuse that, if you think that maybe one of those boxes might tick for you, maybe have a chat to Beyond Blue or your GP and just get a bit of clarification. And because sometimes it might be more than what you think. We like to kind of brush things under the carpet a lot and put up with things.
Yeah. People
change over time. So you could be in a relationship for a very long time and then all of a sudden events happen and things change.
Alicia, I like that because I think it's also a fundamental point of stepping out of that all being mind stuff. And as soon as you get that help, you have those conversations, it does move things along, doesn't it? You know, it's like as soon as you realise that, have that chat with your GP or have that chat with...
Because, like, you might have grown up not realising that the conditioning or the teaching that you've had is harmful to yourself or others. You know, like even just bad eating as a child sets you up for bad eating as an adult, and until someone tells you, like a GP or someone goes, oh, well, you know, that's not actually that healthy for you, you're none the wiser, and you just keep continuing on your life until something breaks.
Yeah. And do you know what? It's also interesting because men in particular have a very difficult time because that sort of emotional languaging hasn't been very well developed in their life. For some, I'm saying some men, and a lot of the times there's a difficulty in communicating because they just can't find the words to match the emotion to express the discomfort. Whereas women are naturally much more in tune with that.
Yeah, you know? You're right. That came
to a
up.
degree,
You're right, totally. The men that were at the detox were very much the same. What you're saying is we just can't find the right words. And I remember when I was going to parenting, to some parenting courses, and they were saying about labelling emotions and labelling feelings so that you can explain to your child and say, oh, you're coming across as being a bit upset right now. Are you feeling sad? And trying to name the emotion that they're feeling so that they could then go, oh, Mum, I'm feeling angry.
Yeah.
And then you think, oh, what's making you feel angry? Instead of them going, I don't know what I'm feeling, they're feeling it, and then they go, oh, that's right, Mum said that's associated with anger. Oh, you're looking angry. Oh, you're upset right now. You're sad. What's happened, you know?
I've got a beautiful poster out in the background, which is our classroom.
Yep.
And it's got a big poster of emotions
for
children.
I'll put that on the web as well.
Yes,
very cool.
It's fantastic.
Yes.
And because people don't talk about the emotional body, and you know, when you look at the emotional body from a physiological point of view, of course that's your limbic system.
Yeah.
Now nobody talks about the limbic system.
It's so confusing.
And then when you're a reflexologist and you know that you've got that pineal gland within you,
that's right.
And it's, you know, when you're working with the sixth chakra point, and that's directly working on the pineal gland, and that gland is just I would say probably one or the most important of the endocrine glands.
It is.
And, as a reflexologist, I work on those, the endocrine glands every treatment I give, because that gland releases, your melatonin, and it is also a joy gland in there called mycelium. And once you get that mycelium rush through you,
you got your happy highs all the time.
absolutely, yeah.
I'm going to add in a bit on that. When you brought up about the pineal gland, in my little bit of research about the pineal gland, there's something that was interesting. It said was, when you don't use a muscle, it atrophies, it shrivels up, and right.
Excellent point.
So that's what's happened with us, with our human evolution, and over time, if we stop using our other abilities, the inner healthier abilities that come from the pineal gland, that's slowly shriveled up over the years.
Yep.
Alright, and now we're reactivating it with each event that we have, the emotions that we have, the pineal's going, it's waking up again.
Yeah.
And it's about rebalancing
Yes,
the
indeed.
internal.
And this is where reflexology is just such a wonderful with the energy medicine, because reflexology is energy medicine, healing touch is energy medicine, therapeutic touch is energy medicine, Reiki is energy medicine, kinesiology.
And there's so many delicious things to choose from, because
I love that. Delicious.
it is. I mean, how can you not?
Massage is
After a great massage, or how do you feel, so much more centered and clear after a reflexology session? I mean, people spend so much time trying to evaluate whether this is proper medicine or not. Whereas
it's just quantified based on your happiness.
It's quantified by the results that it achieves.
Yes.
And it's not about denying something else in order to do this. This is...
Every option should be open.
It makes you feel so good.
And what I love so much about 2019 and going to Canada next month to present at the International Therapeutic Touch Congress, the Energy Medicine Congress in Toronto, in Vancouver, exactly the same week and exactly the same time, there is the Energy Medicine for Psychology happening.
Really?
Yep, for psychologists from all around the world. So, it's time. It's so time for that balance.
Perfect time, isn't it? Really?
To bring that balance back into this Australian biomedical model.
It will happen.
And
Indeed, it will.
to bring in the arts, to bring in the music, to bring in the dance, to bring in the because they're all complementary therapies, and it's getting that, and we've just had a most fabulous email this morning from the Shenyun group from China, and talking about all this wholeness related to their ancient Chinese dance and music. It was fantastic. It was just fantastic. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
No, isn't it lovely? We could. Oh, you know what? I wanted to do some more of this.
Okay.
Because you know what? It's important. This one. What is a healthy relationship?
Okay.
What's a healthy relationship?
And this too pertains to the workplace.
It does, yeah. Because this is important. When you go into the workplace anywhere, if you see these things lacking, then sometimes maybe it takes us to be the ones to set the play. So if you example these sorts of things, then it rubs off and vibrates off, and they will end up mirroring it back to you.
Absolutely.
So
this is this whole thing about spirit to spirit transfer. I've got a beautiful book in there on spirit to spirit transfers that I've had for years.
Yeah.
People in a healthy relationship can be themselves whilst still being together.
Mm.
They bring out the best in each other,
Yeah.
and they support each other.
Yes.
They don't attempt to change or control each other.
Good point.
Yeah, they trust one another, and they have fun together.
Mm.
Are comfortable with each other. They respect each other's decisions, feelings, and thoughts. Are honest with each other and themselves. Are willing to compromise and work together. They accept the good and the bad, and they talk openly without ridicule. So, you know, it's really important because as we grow up as children, you know, and then we go to school and we are influenced by those around us, and then we have our events happen in life, and we've got to kind of start all over again.
Yeah.
And that's what I suppose I really enjoyed about these sorts of things.
Yes.
It's life written down, you know, and I make my own little positive writings of how, you know, this is how it's going to benefit me when I have quit smoking, which was a while ago now, and I wrote down all of these things that were going to benefit me, and I put it on the fridge, and it was a constant reminder of those are the good things that I'm looking forward to. When I get past this pain,
Yeah.
and the withdrawals from quitting smoking is not fun, I knew that I'd already set the intention that at the end of it, I'm going to be healthier. I'm going to be able to breathe better. I'm going to be able to walk down the road without getting out of breath. Things like that. You know, little achievable goals.
Yep.
Yeah.
May I also share
Yeah.
something that is on my Facebook feed?
Okay.
And it came up again about this question. How do you expect us to live with these sort of values and intentions in a workplace that is very ego-driven?
Yeah.
How do you,
Sales
it very much so,
Been in
you know,
sales,
and yet,
I know.
you know, and yet you still have these values, and how is it, how do you navigate this sort of field? And I just wanted to share a couple of outcomes that people, you know, which I find so empowering, because they are in these positions, and yet their mindset is just like so inspiring to be around. You know, so this makes the workplace a great place for spiritual growth. Imagine if spiritual growth at work made the above list of observations, it would read like this. Instead of attachment to opinions, your colleagues have open minds and a desire to really listen to each other to make sure they fully explore ideas and solutions. Instead of judging the workplace as bad, we accept it as it is. We don't need to have an opinion about this policy, that person, or the new method that we're being asked to follow. We work within the conditions to make it better if we can. If not, we either leave or surrender to it. Instead of fear, there is a desire for finding joy in our work by bringing presence and our attention fully to what we're doing now. I wonder how products and services would look differently if these elements were in place. Probably better quality and more innovation.
Yeah. And it's simple mindset changes, isn't it?
It's simple.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to
And
be
not-
complex. You
Not
know?
owning the problems.
Yeah.
Or the, you know, like how you get so worked up because you don't have X, Y, Z things happening at work, and it's like, well, you know, okay, they're not happening. So disassociate yourself from the emotional response to it. It's like, okay,
I've
well,
been
they're
so
not
tied
happening.
up in it,
Yeah.
and bound by it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I felt that too. Oh, I've got to get this and this and this and this done. It was like, okay, well, we're just going to get it done. Like, you go from being to, it's, yeah,
The presence of it actually makes the job easier.
it does. Yeah.
Really, you know, because then you're inspired. You're not continually
You're not on the
coming out of
move.
your past of this is too hard, or I don't want to be here, or you know that presence is enlivening and inspires, and that spirit to spirit thing.
Being with it and not
Absolutely.
evaluating it based on your next move and your next decision that you're going
Which
to
is
do.
where so many people are stuck.
Yeah.
Also, I think that what you know, with the way that the health system is, and the absolute not having enough staff,
Oh, yes, of course.
Mhm.
Budget cuts.
yeah,
It is
budget
scary to be a
cuts.
nurse, isn't it?
Very scary.
Yeah, but not only nurses, it's doctors and it's
Yeah.
you know, other health professionals in the workplace. social workers, you know, would.
But you know, and all
In
can
the
I say,
field.
I think that if the governments would actually recognise all the other healers out there as being able to be those support workers in the hospitals
Yep.
to help out, we might have less shortage.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I know so many nurses who have left the profession and continued in the pathway of healing.
Yep.
And
They don't
Yeah.
like the red tape. They don't.
They-
Absolutely.
Bureaucracy is enough to-
yeah, and
Exactly.
actually that was my very first submission, actually, Senate inquiry into nursing education back in 2001, which I will share with you because I've just written another one to the a review that the government has called through the health department and the chief nursing officer for a review preparing nurses for the future.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
Cool.
So I've written a submission to that, which I will share
Brilliant.
a bit later.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
you know, it's, you know, and I think burnout is a real
True.
issue,
Yeah,
real
that's a
issue.
huge point, isn't
Um,
it?
You know,
Well,
because
recovery from that is essential if you want that person to have any sort of a working life ever again.
yeah,
Because the doubts that come in after you've
Oh,
had
the sense of
burnout.
failure
Yeah.
from burnout is
Yeah.
extraordinary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. Yeah,
It really is.
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
Mhm.
Yeah,
yeah, it sucks. I doubted every single job I went to afterwards.
exactly.
did you suffer from burnout too?
I had an 8-year career. I ran I ran a company that we manufactured camper trailers.
Okay.
Yeah, so I did all of the administration, all advertising, things like that for them. It was an international company. We also exported overseas as well. So it was, you know, it went from a small company to quite large, and I was there for 8 years. And that's where I met my husband. And we got engaged, and, you know, we showed our happiness at the workplace, touchy-feely kisses every now and then. Our boss sadly was going through his own problems at home with his wife, and like I'm going to use that as the excuse for him getting jealous and telling us if I see you scraping each other, one is going to go, and you know, like, come on, boss,
Yeah.
you know, like chill
Some
out. And it's
perspective
like,
would be nice.
but I could see even then he was going through his own. And we did. We pulled it back. We were professional after that. We didn't muck around and act like little school kids anymore at work. But, you know, then we organised that wedding. We had our boss come to the wedding. And then we had our honeymoon. And whilst we were on our honeymoon, our positions got pretty much moved over to other people at our workplace. So when we came back from our honeymoon, I went from managing everything to doing filing. And my husband went from running the storeroom and doing quality control to back on the tools. Completely demoted.
Wow.
Oh, but you can still have your high pay.
But
Yeah. Like I for 8 years, and he'd been there for 3. And then we put up with it. So I was in October, so we put up with everything was just like you said, disintegrating underneath your fingers. It just blah. And December came rolling around, and I remember this because this is who I am. The honest truth, noble truth gets me into trouble, and I basically told my boss, if you want me to dock that man's pay because you don't like the fact that he got paid out on his holiday pay because you don't like him,
yeah,
I'm not taking that money back off him because that's his. Anyway, he wanted me to do something that was illegal, and I said, if you want me to do that, if you keep pushing me to do that, I will give you my 30 days notice.
yeah.
And he said, well, you're my employee, and he phoned the table, you're my employee, you need to do as you're told. Real angry at me,
That's
like,
really familiar.
real
Yeah.
And so I walked into my office, typed up my resignation,
Good for you, girl. Yeah.
and I went, it's my 30 days notice. And unfortunately, it was right before Christmas, so I stayed on and made sure that everybody's Christmas pays and the wages and everything got sorted. 3 months later, my husband left. 2 months after that, the company folded.
Wow.
I'd been running that company borderline insolvent
Yeah.
because of the money issues, this and that. So it was a very, very high stress position that I was in. Every cent that came in was already allocated to bills and like really, really stressful position. Yeah, and it was just like, wow. Yeah.
Well, we saw that last night on the news, didn't we? You know, with the Raylan or the 7:30 report last night with those construction.
You're welcome. That's okay, Brian. Oh, it's still playing. It's okay, James.
That's all right, mate. Hello.
Life doesn't stop. It's okay. Yeah.
Oh, it's electric.
Awesome. Zoom. That's cool, isn't it? Well, you know what? Maybe we should actually fold up our...
Okay.
Yep.
Jolly good.
It's been a wonderful conversation.
Hasn't
this
it?
morning, you know.
Thank you.
Bless you both.
Yeah,
And
no,
we all got
bless
to
you,
tell our
that's
story
wonderful.
because of yours, you know?
Yeah.
That's it.
Because of you, we can.
It's great to be able to share it, you know, and
Yeah.
I know that, you know, just listening to this stuff, I know I do it, it just makes such a big difference to your life, doesn't it? It just adds that affirmation that it's all either going to be alright or it's okay now.
You're going to be alright. And you've seen others go through it.
Yeah.
You're not the only one. There's plenty of support out
Absolutely.
there, and it's reminding ourselves
Yes.
when we're in these points of dark times, it's
Yeah.
going to happen, and find those little things that will pull you up out of the dark,
Little
and
things.
the little things,
Little steps.
doable things, really doable things, so that when you're in that moment and you've got the war happening around you, that you can pull yourself within, because you've got that trick. You remember what that trick is, to pull yourself from the outside and pull yourself back into your heart
Yes.
and heal. And when you're ready and you're balanced and you're stable and you're ready to come out of your shell, you will come out in a more clear, with clarity, with perspective, with balance, and yeah.
Beautiful.
When you get to my age, you can actually be a total open book.
Yeah. Oh, I love you.
Well, you don't need an excuse. That's what's really
That's it.
inspiring, really.
Yeah.
Being an open book anyway. It's much more fun that way,
Yeah.
isn't it? You know?
Oh goodness, yeah.
It takes a lot
Yeah,
of
but,
spiritual strength
you know,
and wisdom to do that.
I
you know.
think too, you know, it's really, really important that, you know, that the your GP, if you particularly have got a very kind, compassionate GP, to just continue to liaise with him. You know,
I also add that if you don't have one,
find
go and
one.
find one.
Yeah.
Because quite often you can go and see your GP and they're just not interested, which is not really a problem because there's a lot of choice.
Exactly.
Just go find one.
And
you know.
I think there's a lot more young doctors today who really are going down the pathway of holistic medicine and do listen and do care.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
There is a lot.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah, there's a lot of hope.
There's a lot out there actually.
There is.
There is.
Yeah, don't be put off by don't be put off by a couple of bad experiences,
Yep.
because everybody's
Very
different.
important point.
Yeah.
Very important point. Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
And
So if it
ask
doesn't
around.
work,
Ask
around.
around.
Ask your friends. Ask your
Ask
family.
your
They
friends.
know.
They know. They know who.
And because they know you, then they're much more likely to share because they'll go, okay, this will work for you or this won't work for you.
Yeah, I know,
because
you couldn't cope with that, doctor.
No, it's horrible.
Oh,
you know. Yeah. And that's the
Yeah.
thing is, if you don't like
Yeah.
it, change the channel.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like
Scroll.
Yeah,
Scroll past.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Swipe.
I don't know that one. Swipe.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Exactly. Well, on that lovely note, we're going to leave now, aren't we,
Yeah.
darling?
Oh,
Yeah.
bless you.
Yeah.
Namaste.
Bless you too.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Thank you.
Namaste, darling.
And
Yeah.
thank you
Thank
for watching and listening, and we'll be on again soon.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Bless you.
Ciao.
Bye bye.